talk about the way this information was conveyed to these relatives ahead of the news conference through a text message. Now, you had a very interesting observation that maybe gave some insight into why a decision like that would be made. Just share that with us.
Well, you know, why they said they try to contact family members through the phone and more traditional means, I think we have two issues. One is the speed of information these days. They had a press conference coming up, but also if we look at how they've treated the people at times throughout, there were definite miscalculations in the understanding of the emotional process. And to me, there was a lack of sensitivity when they dragged the mother out who was saying how she felt about how the situation had been mishandled last week. And now they send the text out.
Every one of us reveres the remains of a loved one who dies, and they don't have human remains. How important is just that tangible physical fact the person's absent?
It's the beginning. It's often the beginning of that process of the grieving that we can see that there is a finality. You know, not necessarily closure, but finality to that life, and we can potentially begin to move on. But a lot of them may not feel like they can move on because there are theories of conspiracy, because all the information hasn't been shared. There's a lot of feelings of being robbed and something stolen from you and taken from you.
Most of these athletes are very young. They're very immature. They're still growing as human beings, and they are immersed in these relationships, you know, and many times they're not capable of handling.
Well, many elite athletes have been coddled and have been given extra special treatment all the way from their childhood years when they were showed talent all the way up through high school, through college. So my belief is that we not only have to look at helping people in the NFL to see that this is a problem, but going back to high school and the NCAA and them adopting policies against dating violence or dating violence in college.
So the reason we called him today is to explain how these debriefings work, that they're more consultations and at least initially meant to keep critics at bay. What's the psychological effect, Doctor? What happens?
Well, I think what we have to look at the idea here is that the president may feel like he invited people into his house to help him make decisions on matters that were both national and international. And then after they left, he might have felt beat up by them. So over time, I think he has felt like he hasn't been able to trust the bipartisan decision-making process. And in his last 2 years, he basically has to create his legacy.
Until you have a sense of trust, there are going to be people around there who are going to capitalize on people's fear, even from a criminal element, but also those who feel that they have no representation are going to represent themselves. And that's how revolutions get started. When people who feel victimized don't feel protected, they can either play the learned helplessness role and take the abuse, or they can become justified persecutors and react to protect their own interests. It's good to know what's happening in other parts of the world. That can be done through a description, and people can kind of imagine what happens when somebody's beheaded. As we see these, I think it's possible to become more desensitized to these barbaric acts that we see as barbaric, but the more we see it, unconsciously, I think we absorb the message that, oh, well, these things happen. And this should never be something that's okay, never be something that we accept.
Here, are we reading too much into it? Is this sort of, team play, or does this guy really need to take a serious look at what he's doing?
Well, I think in all fairness, he deserves his day in FIFA court, because what they say, if the teeth don't fit, you must acquit. But I think what we're looking at is obviously there's a situation here where he's got a pattern of behavior that's been happening again and again. And I think what we have to look at is that people tend to want to win at all costs. Paranoia would be separate from generalized anxiety. When you get to paranoia, you're moving over to more reality testing and how are you viewing reality. So he could be very mistrustful of the environment, not necessarily paranoid, because paranoia goes beyond reality. He had reasons to mistrust. South Africa is not the safest place in the world. He was very much sought after by people. He was potentially a target for crime and things like that. So there were a lot of factors around him that led to his purposeful mistrust.
With us again, I want to get your reaction to what you just heard.
Well, in Zen Buddhism, there's a koan that says, make medicine from suffering. And when life happens to
to us. You know, we can look at it and we can be buried by it, or we can do something with it. And that's when I say, let life happen for you. This is something that's very difficult for anybody to say it happened for them. But when we can try to make understanding and out of pain and turn that into a translation of learning and growth and healing for others, that's a very positive and powerful thing to do. When people are suicidal, it's not that they want to end their life, it's that they want the pain to stop. And the only way they believe the pain will stop is if their life ends. One of my favorite lines was just in Mrs. Doubtfire, where he comes up from the cake and, hello! You know, I love that line. And he was the indomitable Peter Pan in Hook.
Yes.
That was his,
Yes.
that captured who he was, the essence of his soul. And that people who commit suicide in his manner, and even through his own comedy routines. In one of the interviews, that there was a podcast he did that I heard, that he had an inner dialogue about suicide and this voice he had, this discussion he had. So there's no way to know it. And the line from the Good Will Hunting movie, where he says to Matt Damon, "It's not your fault." If there was ever a prophetic message that he could have given to his family, he gave it in that movie. For me, like I said, I'd rather know and make every day the best day it can be.
Amen, brother. I'm with you on that. Erik Fisher, thank you so much.